Welcome to What Happens in Vegas. Today we have Kash Khan, and he is a friend of mine, someone who I really look up to, I've seen him grow multiple businesses, and now I see him with this passion for helping people with their health. He started the DNA company, and that's how we were introduced. And I'm so happy to have him here. You might know him from all the amazing videos he's now producing, where he's just telling you the truth about the way to stay healthy and stay away from toxins. So thanks so much for being here, Cash.
It's a pleasure. It's us. Good to be here.
And your company is Cash Can Official, one of them, and DNA company, and I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little confusing. I've started the DNA company really out of a need for my own health, right? I was sick and I met you back in those days when I wasn't doing so well. And I learned a lot from you and that helped me. And it's like, how do I take the science and get it to everybody? So taking this academic thing that was in a bubble that only PhDs had access to and then making it easy.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what we did. And now, many thousands of people later, I decided last year that as we grow to the next level, which is taking all of what we know and plugging it into the healthcare system to truly change the system, I'm not the right guy. So we hired a CEO who has healthcare experience. She's taken over. And now it's me doing coaching, supporting people in terms of, athletes, celebrity type people, and just out there venting about all the nonsense I see that's making people sick. So that's where my time goes.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I love them because you can say some stuff that us as regulated healthcare practitioners can't always say.
Yeah.
And yeah, then we can just click and share it and yeah, just get that information out there because dose makes the poison is one thing I say. So all the ways that we can kind of lower our toxic load as much as possible, we can't get away from all of them. It's going to be obviously super helpful. But you still use the DNA test that's a big part of your kind of coaching
Yeah,
platforms that you have, right?
I think there's a lot of ways to go about seeking like root cause health. It's the mode that I know. Some people work on the gut like you, some people work on, looking at acid tests and other things. But for me, it's like this foundational baseline. If I know how my body works and I know what biology is broken, then it takes the trial and error out of everything.
Hmm.
It takes one size fits all. Now everything else I'm going to do, I don't need to test and check, and I just know what to focus on, what to prioritize on. And it's not like, hey, this gene says you have an 80% risk of dementia. It's more like, here's why you would get dementia. Now go work on that, and it shouldn't happen.
Yeah, yeah. So just to explain to people that don't understand DNA testing, what you're testing, it's SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphisms of certain genes that can make you more prone to certain issues, correct?
Yeah, so think of a gene as an instruction. So you have 50 trillion cells make up this human form, and every single one has this instruction manual inside that tells the cell how to do all its various jobs. From making hormones to clearing toxins to making brain neurochemicals. And if you can read the instruction, you understand how well it's being described, meaning that sometimes the instruction has a spelling mistake, sometimes there's a page missing, there's a paragraph missing, and then you know that that job just isn't happening properly. Or maybe it's happening a little too well, like you're making too much of a hormone, for example.
Yeah.
That,
So, sorry.
so you go, I was just gonna say that's where you jump in and you know precisely where to intervene as opposed to trying to mask a symptom.
Yeah, perfect. So what are the biggest things that you see like that have the biggest impact out of, because I know in your test, and that was one of the things when I met you, the way that it was laid out, and you have those stop signs, like
Yeah.
I found that really cool, like especially for like that hormone panel when I'm looking at mine and there and it was like, you're kind of showing, okay, estrogen's supposed to go down this pathway, like for a female, but maybe mine preferred going down like testosterone a little bit. So maybe things like dim wouldn't be like a great idea for me because they're also gonna like maybe lower my estrogen more. Like I don't know if I'm screwing that up, but can you explain the hormone side of things and how that can give some people some insight onto even their way that they're detoxing hormones?
So, it's funny because when we went into the research, what I realized was that there was a lot of science on DNA. We already knew what the genes were. We already had the human genome sequence, but it wasn't actionable. Nobody knew what to do with it,
Hmm.
right? And so the research we did was we actually sat in front of patients, 7,000 of them over 3 years to understand if I have your DNA and I can talk to you about your problems. How do I intervene? What's the action? Right? And what we didn't realize until we started doing this was the biggest area that needed the most support was women's health and hormones. So broken and gray area, and I mean, gaslighting is a very good word to use, right? That's what's going on most of the time. And so we found that this thing that was treated as gray, oh, you're just supposed to have a horrible menopause, you're supposed to have fibromyalgia and an infertility and all these things. The gene cascade that drives hormone production, toxicity, and clearance is very clear,
Mhm.
right? Once you map it out, and that key word map, as opposed to this gene means this gene means that, as opposed to the entire map of what's going on beginning to end in your body, then
Mhm.
you can really make a call. And
Mhm.
that's what led to this sort of pioneering what we call functional genomics. Genetics is this gene means this gene means that. Functional genomics is here's the biology that we already understand, A to Z, this steps, the many steps you have to go through for a particular process. Let's map each gene in that cascade, and we can be precise. There's no more guesswork. So hormones was where that really played a big role.
Mhm. And so, that I found really beneficial. And then even like some people understanding the whole depression, anxiety side, or being more prone to it. Because all these things don't necessarily get turned on, right? It's based on epigenetics. We reach this tipping point, but then if you reach that tipping point, then that can be like, okay, this kind of genetics got turned on where you're not processing XYZ. But as far as the brain component of things, like, and MTHFR, I mean, they all tie together. Like we even try to separate, oh, this affects the brain, but your hormones affect the brain and all of that. So everything ties together. So I'm not even trying to like make things into like different buckets, but we have these genes that are more directly related to dopamine and so what do you see with that? Like what are some examples of things that you see and ways that you would help fix it from looking at those type of genetics?
So you mentioned dopamine. Let me give you an example,
Yeah.
and this will lay it out for everybody. And I'm going to tell you a story about my niece
Hmm.
and how this was actually the moment that we went from being a research company to like, wow, everybody needs this. I didn't realize what's going on in healthcare and the impact. So my niece and my mom and my sister live together, not far from me, a few minutes away. And I got a call from them saying that she can't breathe. Like, what's going on? So I head over there and I said, this looks like an anxiety attack. And she was just getting off of it, like, and something that you're familiar with, right? She an anxiety attack. Uh, I called a pediatrician friend and she seemed like she was over. And he said, yeah, it sounds like it's over. And it does sound like an anxiety attack. If it happens again, let me know. And so sometime later, my mom calls me again saying, it happened again, but this time she fell over and she hit a table on her way down and she can't walk. You need to take her to the hospital. So, okay, I took her to the hospital, called my pediatrician friend. He says, yeah, sounds like it again. And I guess she was so choked up, she just lost her breath and she collapsed. So I take her to the hospital, spend a good 8 hours there checking for fractures, checking blood work, etc. Nothing wrong. The doctor said, if it happens again, let us know. And I knew what that meant. It meant that she's getting diagnosed with an anxiety condition, and we're going to tell you what pills she has to take.
Hmm.
And so I then went back, didn't do much about it, and got another call sometime later, which was your niece is gone. I was like, what does that mean? Well, there's a note saying I can't take it anymore, and she's gone. And this young girl, if you were to meet her, completely out of character, sweet, innocent young girl, right? And so I literally head over there and I go and she can't be gone far. It's like she doesn't leave the house by herself on her own, and I find her a block away, just standing there, running away from like the feeling. She just needed to get out of there,
Hmm.
right? And she didn't even know what she was running away from. So I asked her, what is it, bullying? Like, what's going on? Just tell me. And she literally didn't know.
Hmm.
So it was literally at that moment I told the office, email me her DNA report right now. I should have done this a while ago. Let's see what's going on. So what did I see? Is in her hormone cascade. So the beginning of the cycle is when you're just finished removing all hormones and you're getting ready to have the menses and just clear it out, right? And so for her, there was already a challenge producing enough. So she went into a much steeper decline, deeper valley of low hormones. So that was step one to why does she not feel so good at a particular time of the month and why my mom was calling me like clockwork every 28, 30 days, right? Then I thought, well, why now? Because she's been cycling for like a year and a half,
Hmm.
right? So this happened during peak COVID when Toronto had the world's longest lockdown in the winter, and she hadn't been outside in like 5 months.
Yeah.
Literally. She
Hmm.
literally hadn't left the apartment that they lived in.
Yeah.
So I checked her vitamin D genetics,
Hmm.
and there's step one, there's a gene called CYP2R1 that takes D2 from the sun and converts it into the active D3. She had the worst version of that gene. There's a gene called VDBP that takes that activated D3 and transports it to the cell. She had the worst version of that gene. There's a gene called VDR that then binds and gets it intercellular where we actually need it. She has the worst version of that gene.
Hmm.
Horrible, worst possible vitamin D genetics in a context where she hadn't been outside in the winter with zero vitamin D.
Hmm.
There's 22,000 genes that make up with the human genome. 2,500 need adequate vitamin D
Hmm.
to have them express properly and have your body do its jobs. And so it's responsible for 10% of biochemistry, more
Hmm.
than 10%.
Hmm.
He went into system failure. So why did it express as this? Going back to what you said about dopamine, why an anxiety issue? So when it comes to dopamine, there's a gene called DRD2 that determines the density of the receptors in your brain. How much do you bind? So when that pleasure happens or that reward, achieve something at work, eat some tasty food, pleasure, what's the level of intensity that you felt it?
Hmm.
Then there's a gene called MAO, which metabolizes and breaks that dopamine down. And
Hmm.
then COB comes along and sweeps up that metabolite and truly gets you back to baseline where you're supposed to be, right? So she has the lowest expression of DRD2,
Hmm.
very hard to feel pleasure, and the fastest possible MAO and the fastest possible COB.
Hmm.
So depression is her baseline,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
She's designed for reward-seeking behavior. She needs a challenge constantly, or she doesn't feel good. So
Hmm.
this perfect storm,
Hmm.
uh, hormones suck, vitamin D sucks,
Hmm.
neurochemicals suck, in a context where she wasn't getting vitamin D, no sun, no challenge because she was stuck at home, led to an anxiety crash on that particular day of the month, which
Yeah.
was the body can't take it anymore, right? So what was the solution? She didn't need an anxiety pill. She needed high dose vitamin D, but split a couple times during the day because she didn't transport it and bind it properly.
Hmm.
And she needed L-theanine to make her feel better
Hmm.
on the dopamine end, right? And that was it. Literally, that was it. That was the solution.
Hmm.
And that happened right when I figured it out. And since that day, she never had the problem again.
Hmm.
Versus, she'd probably still be on an anxiety pill.
100%. And then never knowing why, and probably they wouldn't work and they'd cycle through other ones until it just like forced her body maybe into the state. But that's funny because when you guys went over my genetics, I had that same vitamin D,
Yeah.
crappy genetics. My vitamin D's forever been low. Doesn't matter. I'd come home, I'm so tanned, and my vitamin D's in the tank, like always. And then so that was one of the things. And even the dosing of the vitamin D is what I learned from you guys, like taking small amounts to get it up. Because if I took a bolus dose, which I was doing and then retested, still didn't have vitamin D that was like, even close to a robust amount. Like it's never until I did my like smaller dosing. And it's funny because I still crashed taking vitamin D, but there were other like toxic load coming in, right? And then I have other genetics that make me not detox well at all. Like not MTHFR, but even just like my liver in general is familial, like more tend to be um backed up. Like it's that Italian Mediterranean kind of liver and the whole gut thing that tied together. But that was, and you're talking about her story. It was at that time in my cycle where my heart stuff started. And then my body kind of got a handle on it. And I felt the severe anxiety. But then it was again the next month. And then like it happened again. And I felt completely normal in between those two things.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then if your immune system gets tanked enough and these like other pathogens can take over or other toxins, build up, like it's all layers, right? That's why I'm saying like if you have this information. But other things, so as far as you just tied in dopamine, you tied in hormones, you tied in um you tied in everything except the big thing people are talking about right now is MTHFR. And, you know, I mean, I wanted to talk about how important it is, but how like it's not always the magic bullet. You don't just give someone B12 and they're perfect. Like, someone has been saying online, not you, but like it's like we've all had a patient who has autism and we've tried B12 for sure, and they're still not just magically better, right? Like, so, but why is it so important? Why is it so popular right now? And, why is it an important foundation for you to work on all the other stuff to help people in specific cases?
Yeah, so it's it's never the only answer. And if anyone tells you if you're stuck, like I don't get it, nothing's working, right? There's never a single pill or a single solution. There's multiple things going on,
Yeah.
which is why you're stuck.
Hmm.
And the same is true with your methylation. So first of all, methylation itself, this MTHFR gene, it's not the only gene that does the job. There's a whole cascade upstream and downstream. And you could have the best MTHFR and everything else isn't working. And does that work? It doesn't work, right? Or you could have the worst MTHFR and everything else is doing good. It doesn't mean you're doing bad.
Hmm.
It's kind of a baton pass. Methylation is something gets methylated and then the next gene does a job and then the next gene does a job and the next gene does, it's a team, right? And so what is methylation? It's a few things. It's taking a non-water soluble toxin and making water soluble so you can get rid of it. So it's a part of your detox system, which is why it affects neurodegenerative diseases and behavioral development stuff like autism.
Hmm.
It's also taking certain nutrients and converting them into a bioavailable form.
Hmm.
So there's some things you take in that need to be changed to the form that your body can actually use, and methylation does that. It's also gene expression.
Hmm.
So your body has a baseline genetic code,
Hmm.
and it's designed to do things in certain ways. Now, every input from food, environment, nutrition will constantly be changing the expression, but that's temporary. Your genes are permanent, the expression is temporary, so
Hmm.
long as the input is there. And methylation is doing that job. So if you're not having efficient methylation, there's a bit of a lag in your body's response to whatever input comes in, whether you're trying to detox something or change your mood or get adrenaline so you can run from a tiger or whatever, right?
Hmm.
So and B12 is important for part of the methylation cascade, but all of the B vitamins are, right?
Yeah.
And getting specific from, do I need folic acid? Do I need folate? Do I need folinic acid? How does my body actually metabolize these things? Do I need my B12 under my tongue? Do I swallow it? Do I pull my methylcobalamin off the shelf, which is what you'd normally buy, or does that not work for me? Or
Hmm.
do I need something else like adenosine, for example?
Hmm.
So it answers all those questions, and then all of a sudden you start to methylate properly. And then, just like I said about vitamin D, it is supportive of so many systems and processes in the body that everything just starts to get better. But it's never the only answer. There's always something else going on.
100%. And you messaged mentioned the folinic acid, right? Because I believe that came up for me too, but mostly it's always methylfolate in almost
Yeah.
everything now, right? And that you can also over methylate. So can you like dive into that one a little bit more? Like to
Yeah. Like, how many people take a B vitamin and then tell you they got a headache, right? Or
Mhm.
how many people take a B vitamin? I had a lady that I was dealing with that overdosed on B6 and she had a massive change in her breast size. She just started getting way more estrogenized,
Mhm.
right? And so if you over methylate things, and this all we're saying is that precision is important, but it's also possible. You don't need to guess. You don't need to go through trial
Yeah.
and error and
Yeah.
just go through pain. It's like, no, we already know how the body works.
Mhm.
Now we know the genes that drive all of those systems and processes. So just get it right, and take exactly what you need.
Mhm. But what's the negative of taking like a methylated folate if you do better with folinic, or even some people you guys say for better with folic acid form? Like, and
Yeah.
and what is that? Is that MTRR, or is that a combination of MTHFR and like
So
what?
we first look at MTHFR, which tells us how efficiently somebody deals with folic, folinic, folate, right? Sorry, how efficiently they deal with folic, I should say, sorry.
Mhm.
And if they're not doing well, then we look at a gene called SHMT1,
Mhm.
which tells us, well, then what should they take instead?
Mhm.
Right? And if they're doing well with SHMT, well, they're okay with the methylfolate. And if they're not, they need the folinic acid. So
Mhm.
it's kind of that's why I'm saying single genes don't ever give you a full story because the body doesn't work like that. There's multiple steps in any process. So what the work we did was to map out these steps so that people know what to do. So what I'm saying to you right now, um, is not academic genetics. If
No.
you went to school and got a PhD in genetics, you would not know this, right? You would learn about each individual gene and what it does, and you would never be able to help anybody unless they had a rare genetic condition, which, you turn a switch on or off. But the functional and actionable for the big chronic problems, we had to create that interpretation ourselves.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, actually, as the genome stuff has gotten bigger and they're discovering, or like as they learn more about it, like I feel like a lot of the patients that I am working with that are autistic that are doing better, they're improving and their parents are happy. And then they get this news that they have this catastrophic gene, right? And it's like, okay, well, that gene was already there and it was obviously turned
Yeah.
on, and both of your boys are portraying that gene, and you have a girl and she's like neurotypical and she doesn't have that gene. So we see it's playing a role, but we see as we lower the toxic load and work on the other genetics that, or support the other genetics, that the child's improving. So it's that whole like, the genes load the gun, environment kind of pulls the trigger. And so it's like, can you speak to that for people that get so scared? Because also people do these tests and say they did 23andMe and they're like, oh, I have the ApoE2, or, and I'm so high, I'm going to get Alzheimer's, or I'm going to have breast cancer because I have the BCR. So
Yeah.
just speaking to that for people, which I think you've already kind of touched on, but just even to clarify, because there's that whole fear aspect that we don't want for people, because that changes the environment in a negative way.
Yeah. So I understand the fear based on what we think is possible. And I would feel the same way. And we can use the ApoE and Alzheimer's as an example, but if you know what actually is possible, there shouldn't be any fear. What do I mean by that? There's a gene called ApoE, and if you have a certain version of it, 3, 4, you're told that you have an 8 to 10 times elevated risk of dementia versus the average population. And if you have another version of it, 4, 4, you're
Mhm.
told you have 17 to 25 times elevated risk of
Yes,
dementia.
that's the one that I was talking about,
Okay.
the four
So
four.
now imagine hearing that the anxiety and stress from that news will probably cause the dementia.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
what else do you need? Right. And so what does it do? And a doctor will tell you it causes dementia. And if you ask them how, they probably don't know the answer. So
Mm-mm.
ApoE is responsible for the efficient transport of lipids through your body, cholesterol movement.
Mhm.
Right? So how does that cause dementia? Well, when you have inflammation in your body, including neural inflammation in your brain, your body sends cholesterol as a hormone to that location to repair the inflammation. It microabrasions, tears, and truly inflammation damage the cell. Cholesterol is a tool that fixes things.
Mhm.
The same toxin or free radical that cause the inflammation will also oxidize and damage the cholesterol.
Mhm.
There's a bit of a lag and it gets left behind, and you get a plaque. So if you have a bad ApoE gene, you don't do a good job of that transport, you're much more likely to develop an amyloid plaque in your brain, which is an early step to cognitive decline. Brain cells start to die, and then you have a disease.
Mhm.
So the real question is, why did I have inflammation in my brain?
Mhm.
So when I see someone with an ApoE 3, 3 or 3, 4 or 4, 4, I don't tell them Alzheimer's, good luck, right?
Yeah.
It's more like, okay, this is not a prescription, this is a priority. Now we need to focus on what are the pathways that lead to brain inflammation. And we know that they are what you breathe, they are what you eat, what goes into your gut, what you put on your skin. It is stress and cortisol. It is metabolic. What in terms of insulin response, or when I said what you eat earlier, I meant in terms of toxic load.
Yeah.
And then there's also what you eat in terms of insulin resistance. And then the last one is hormones. So what are your hormones doing that may also be toxic and cause inflammation?
Mhm.
So when we investigate these things, we might have that aha moment of, oh, this particular woman makes a version of estrogen called 4 or 16 hydroxyestrogen, which is highly inflammatory.
Mhm.
And she also happens to take the birth control pill. And she happens to use a Teflon coated frying pan and use a lot of cosmetics. So she's overloading her endocrine system with mimickers, right?
Mhm.
That's a recipe for dementia. So if you if they change the habits and you clear the estrogen toxins, the thing that causes brain inflammation isn't there. It doesn't matter what version of ApoE gene you have at that point. So that's a much more functional way to think about it.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think I'll add in if they have root canals or, and those toxins get to the brain and or any above the collar infections. So like making sure, but it all goes back to toxic load, which is what we're getting at. It's just finding out what your toxic load is or avoiding those toxic loads even more because you do have this potential, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so that's a powerful thing. And this is what, like, I have a girl, she's not my patient, she's not into all this. Like, I just know her and she found it and she's freaking out. And, and I'm like, no, you can do all these things. But then at the same time, she doesn't want to do all the things. So you're like, you really have to, if you're going to learn about your genetics, like be prepared to make changes if you have to make changes. Because there's also breast implants, which, are a anything foreign in the body. And especially now, all this whole thing about breast implant illness, if you have these genetics that make you more prone to things, or even if you don't in this day and age, I'd say, anything that you can avoid surgery wise that creates interference fields or anything, it's going to be more protective to your health. But
Mhm.
just even keeping that in mind, that if you do these tests, be ready to accept the information and make the changes that you need to make. Now, I have another personal question, like going back to the test that I did, because at that time when we did the test, I was actually taking like resveratrol, and it was one of the things that came up that, and it wasn't you interpreting at that time, it was one of the doctors, and he was like, don't ever take resveratrol, like it's catastrophic and all this. And so I was scared of resveratrol like myself for a long time. And then when I got really sick and my joints were a real problem, and I was working with more bioregulatory stuff, and they're like, I want you to do these resveratrol suppositories. I'm like, no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
you know? And anyways, he had helped me a lot through other things. So I ended up doing it. And it was like, it really helped me, like pain wise in inflammation in my body. And so can you speak to that too, like a time and a place, and not like speaking in absolutes, even when it comes to these things? Because overall it is theoretical what things are turned on. Sometimes
Yeah.
things, yeah. Do you have any?
Yeah, so there's certain, and this is where even within reports, I've heard people say that, wait a second, there's conflicting information,
Yeah.
right? Here you told me to eat this, but here you told me not to eat this.
Yeah.
Because it depends what problem you're trying to solve. Because the same thing will speed up a gene or slow down a gene,
Yeah.
right? But in terms of resveratrol, it's like if you're estrogen dominant, it may be valuable because it slows the CYP19A1 gene down, especially if you combine it with DIM and other things. But if you're not, you may be overloading that, that sort of that trigger, like you said, the environmental trigger, and you can feel horrible. And this is why some women will take a estrogen balancing supplement off the shelf and they'll feel incredible. And another one will take that same product and have a crazy headache, crazy menstrual cycle. Like, what's in this product? It doesn't work because the way we make hormones is not all the same. And so, meanwhile, resveratrol has amazing benefits. It's known to, the guy, what is it? David Sinclair says that's the one thing he takes every day with his NMN, right? Why? Because it is highly beneficial. So it depends what problem you're trying to solve. If it's cellular health, inflammation, great tool. If it's hormones, for you particularly, ongoing, it'll be a problem. So
Yeah.
knowing that I can have this in my toolkit to solve a short-term inflammation problem, great. I
Yeah.
might have a bad menstrual cycle that month and feel a little bit rocky, bit of a trade-off.
hmm
But long term, this is not the right thing for me because my hormones aren't going to like it.
Yeah. And the same thing was with curcumin, because I think it was because I favored, like I didn't go down the estrogen pathway. Like I was more
Yeah.
like wanting to go down testosterone. And he was like, you could have early perimenopause. And I was like, like, and
Yeah.
and it's good information because, and so the one other thing was curcumin.
Yeah. Same thing, same exact thing where it slows that gene down.
Yeah.
And it's probably the DIM and curcumin are probably the most commonly prescribed female hormone supplements. But I can tell you that a good 35%-ish of the women we deal with are androgen dominant.
hmm
It's the opposite. They
hmm
need it sped up. They don't need it slowed down.
hmm
Right? And especially if you're trying to get pregnant, or it's like I go to the gym and I can't get the curves that I want,
hmm
or my hair and skin is not what I want it to be. Maybe you need a little bit more estrogen, and that's actually going to make it worse. I can't tell you how many times we've seen women go on a hormone supplement and the hair starts falling out. because
Mhm.
they get overly androgenized and they make too much dihydrotestosterone, which will kill hair follicles, right? So
Mhm.
it's again goes back to the same thing, precision.
Yeah.
What does your body actually need? What's the actual problem you're trying to solve?
Mhm.
We now are blessed that we have access to this. We didn't know this a few years ago.
No, for sure. So then now my story about curcumin was I had ferritin overload, and there's an extract from curcumin called BCM 95 that binds ferritin. So I used a very high dose for a short time, and it took again the pain away from the joints. It started making my skin healthier because I was having pigmentation come up from the high ferritin. Um, but then it affected, like, I just started feeling like my uterus, like aching.
Yeah.
And I knew that this was a thing and I was only using it as a tool, but it was just very interesting to me because, and it helped me. And then and I stopped and then I tested it. I said, okay, I'm going to stop. Okay. My uterus feels better. Like no cramping randomly, like stuff that I wasn't experiencing. And then like I took it again just to see, and it did the same thing again. So it's, it was obviously really good information to have for that, but I still used it in that short term as a tool at a high dose, and it really helped change like my pain and lower my ferritin. And then what I did going forward was I just did higher dose silymarin to get the rest of it, and then like some bloodletting and stuff like that. But it was that inflammatory response that had turned it on. But and then this was interesting to me because then I went into my thing, and I did have the gene that can make you have iron overload,
Mhm.
the hemochromatosis gene, one copy. But then I was interested because then my parents did it and they didn't have a copy of each. Is that possible? Because is it
It's
SNP?
unusual. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
unusual but possible. So there's the sequencing of genetics is not anywhere close to where people think it is,
Yeah.
right? Meaning that, Dale Bredesen, this famous doctor that does, he wrote a book about reversing Alzheimer's. He talks about genetics and he says he doesn't use a 23andMe test because he feels it's only 75% accurate, right? It's genes. How can it not be 100%? Because the sequencing technology is not where it is, and most genetic companies are data selling companies. Let me collect as much data as possible
Yeah.
so I can sell it to a pharma company. And so they're looking for a massive dump of SNPs, collect as many SNPs as possible. But when you do that, you lose accuracy because you're testing for too much at one time.
Yeah.
And so you'll often find that there's algorithms where a call has to be made, meaning that you're leaning towards one direction or another, and an algorithm will say, okay, we think you're this.
Yeah.
Maybe you weren't, right? So you're probably your mom or dad did have that copy of the gene, but an algorithm pulled them in the other direction.
Yeah, and it makes sense because like if you look at my dad's side, like symptomatology, like there is like for for sure like some sort
Yeah.
of hemochromatosis, like my grandfather, my dad, my now me, my probably my brother, but not my sister because she looks more genetically like my mom and like the Polish side, like because we're half Italian, quarter Scottish, quarter Polish, right?
Right.
So and she looks like more Polish, if
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
Um, so it's interesting to see even that way, right? Because we're only 25% similar to our siblings. Um, yeah, so and also I know because I did 23andMe before I knew anything, right? Like this was years before I met you. Just like someone bought it for me as a gift, thought it was interesting, didn't know they were collecting my my information, was very naive. Um, but and then like even I remember it was either you or Harris explaining to me like because it didn't match like the MTHFR, like even I believe like they like said I had every SNP, and like yours was actually like for the MTHFR specifically because you can put it through the genetic genie. So yeah, they're just not very dependable for sure. So that's that was just something that I did, obviously,
Yeah.
like
So that's the reason we very intentionally, of the 22,000 genes that most guys are looking for, we only test just under 100 of them.
yeah,
It's most people say, well, like in the industry would say your test sucks because you're not looking for enough data.
yeah.
We're saying our test is better because it's accurate. We're only looking for what matters. I can already look in the mirror and tell you if my ear is connected to my head. I don't need a gene for that, right?
Yeah, I know. You're
But
like
I need to, yeah,
likely to have the gene attached. Yeah, that's funny. Those are
yeah. So we need to know the functional pathways, detox, neurochemicals of the brain, hormones, metabolic, gut health, everything around anti-inflammatory and methylation, glucuronidation, removal of mold. So th those are the things that you work on every day,
Yeah.
right? It allows things to be more precise. That's all people need to know.
Yeah. And that's why it's exciting that we're going to be offering this to everyone in our audience, because we had so much to test and work on, and now we have a lot of people to just optimize, and like this is going to become like another core part for us, like, and just give us more information, especially for those people that really want to continue to optimize more and more, and just know more about them. I tell people to be biologically interested. Everyone should know this information about themselves. There's no doubt for me about that.
Yeah, I mean, anyone listening can probably hear that there's a lot of nuances in interpretation,
Yeah.
right? That you add a food, you add an environment, you add a co-system from hormones, and things change. So right now, I don't believe that genetic test plus report does the job, right? It's like you're going to be told you have an 80% chance of dementia, good luck. That
Hmm.
is not useful. I want to know, why did 20% of people with my genome not get sick?
Hmm.
What did they do right?
Yeah.
And so that requires conversation. That requires understanding your environment, or requires understanding your stress levels, all of that. And so I find the best outcomes we have is when I'm working with somebody one on one, and I am able to spend that time with them. And it becomes so overwhelmingly sort of magical, let's say, in terms of this aha moment of wow, 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 I finally know what's going on. It all makes sense now,
Hmm.
right? But that's hard to do because I mean, I do work with, like yourself, with pro athletes and celebrities and that type of thing. And it's hard to do that for everybody. And so to your question, like, how do we bring this to the community? I've taken all of what I do and redesigned it into a program where we can do a master class with the group,
Hmm.
and everybody can show up with their DNA in their hand, and I'm going to walk through it the way I would if I was working with a pro athlete or if I was working for a CEO, and the same nature of let's
Hmm.
spend 8 hours together and go through every single aspect of this. And
Hmm.
I've done this before in a group setting with, like, I'll go work on a CEO, for example, and he'll say, "Hey, I need you to do my management team," and I'll have a bunch of people there, right?
Yeah.
So that's the intention. Is it's not testing, I don't think, can get you the level of insight we've been talking about today. But me taking a look, being able to go back and forth with people, and getting to those subtle nuances that FDA and Health Canada won't even let us put in a report, right? There's a lot more that we know than what's in a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's where I'm really happy to work with you on this partnership and get it out to everybody.
Yeah, no, it's really invaluable. And like you got really passionate about this from your own kind of story, but also like I think what is really cool that people should know about you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like you're already this like serial entrepreneur, like having these, great success with businesses. Like you don't have to do this. Like this is, you're passionate about this stuff.
Yeah, this is the opposite of what I should be doing right now.
I
Really,
know.
like, people scale up and I'm scaling down, right?
Yeah, like
So
yeah.
yeah, because I found when I studied longevity, one of the big things that stood out was there's this study that came from Harvard where they studied all these like centenarian types, people that were 90 to 100 plus, and they were asking the question, what's that one thing that these people did that we just didn't think they would do, right? And it came down to that they had a very small number of very high quality relationships. So picture the farmer, right? They had their routine, they did their thing. And what did that equal? Low stress, but it also usually was tied to sense of purpose.
Yeah.
They didn't need anything more. Every day they woke up, there was so much purpose in every hour that they spent. It actually caused them to live longer. Every year, this is what we're meant to do on this planet. We're meant to, right, provide and leave a dent when we leave.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like you said, I built a bunch of companies, just built another one. But for me now, I realize that the most valuable thing I can do is this, help more people. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm,
Yeah, that's amazing. I really, really respect that. I don't know if I've ever told you that. So this
no,
is
thank you. That's so I kind of feel like finally figured out why I'm here, you know?
yeah, that's amazing. So powerful. And I feel like I know you genuinely too. There's so much like ingenuity in these fields now, right? Like where people want to make the money. You made the money before and like, and not that you shouldn't now and whatever, but it's just like, it's very like passion into purpose, or, pain into purpose kind of thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I totally, and even like, just like the information you get out there is hard sometimes too. You get kickback from people, or not kickback,
Yeah.
what I mean? You get, um, I don't know, maybe, people think that people that aren't in this field might think we're a little bit out there, where we've just been through this pain and we've learned, and we're trying to tell you as kind of like canaries, like, you don't have to go through this. So, we don't get anything from having to go against the grain. Like, if anything, it's just more stress for us. But
Yeah,
like,
I get censored all the time.
yeah,
All the time. I can't tell you. It's just this game that I play with Instagram where it's like, okay, this is censorship month. I'm gonna lose a bunch of followers. They literally, I'll get messages from people saying that, why do I have to follow you? Did you remove me? It's like,
yeah,
no, Instagram did, right?
yeah,
And so it's a constant up and down. They let me have some free speech and then they take it away. Let me have it. So I just keep pushing and I just don't know which week is going to be a good week or a bad
yeah.
week.
Are you on Rumble too?
I'm going to start soon. So I used to run a podcast, but since I stopped running the company, I left the podcast with the company because it was really a tool for the clients.
Yeah.
Interesting that just like you said, that podcast was just me speaking to our audience, like our customer base, and it became like I think it was top 3-4% of health podcasts within a very short time,
Uh,
right? And so I think I'm going to do it again, but likely on Rumble
Yeah.
because then I can say what I actually want to say, right?
Yeah. They're actually from Brampton, which is where I went to high school and everything. The owner, he's a young
Oh,
guy,
cool.
and he was just like, fighting in the Senate, because they're even trying to, like, he has like a whole separate platform that is like so individualized. It's not influenced by all the other, like, they've created some crazy software, and that was my other friend that created the software. So I'm definitely going to start, utilizing that platform a lot more too, because you can say what you want to say and it's not going to be censored so much.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'll be there with you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, very inspired by them as well. And so what are the other, like, do you have any other stories that come to mind, like the power of the genetics, like you told about your niece? We kind of went into mine a little bit. Is there any other ones that kind of stand out that, could show people like the power of knowing these genetic pathways?
We could spend the whole day telling stories.
Let's
Let
do
me
it.
tell you a story from that came from you that I don't even know if you know about.
Okay.
There was a hockey player that you were dealing with. This was very early when I first met you.
Mhm.
And this guy, not by you, but by somebody else, was given an andro gel pack. So he had recovery issues.
Yeah, that wasn't me.
That was okay.
That
Yes.
wasn't me that gave him the
No, you
and
didn't get the pack. No, no, no. You were working with him on something, and then some clinician. So he had recovery issues, energy issues, and a doctor told him you need some testosterone and not steroids. You're an athlete, but just some, BHRT, bioidentical hormones. And so he gave him what's called an androgel pack. So he put this pack on his belly, skin absorbs the testosterone, and the thinking is, I give you testosterone, your testosterone level should go up. So what happened was he started to get gynecomastia. He grew man boobs and his libido went down. And he went back to the doctor, and the doctor said, see, I told you, you have a real problem. You need a lot of testosterone. So he gave him some more. And the guy ended up with glowing, beautiful skin and a nice head of hair, but he literally was gaining weight and horrible anxiety and all these issues. So that's when we started looking at it. And what did I see? That the hormone cascade, whether you're a man or a woman, it's the same thing. Women have a monthly cycle, men have a daily cycle. That's the difference.
Mhm.
Progesterone goes into testosterone, aromatizes into estrogen. The CYP19A1 gene is responsible to aromatize testosterone and convert it into estrogen. This guy had the fastest possible CYP19A1 gene. So when that clinician gave him testosterone, his genetics say, thank you for this ingredient. I'm going to take all of this and turn it into estrogen.
Mhm.
And what was the result? Man boobs.
Mm.
And he gained more, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't matter what any choice you're making when it comes to health, wellness, it all can be a step towards your health and wellness or a step away. right?
Mhm.
Everything you're doing, whatever you eat, whatever you breathe, whoever you're talking to, it's
Mhm.
constantly a choice between good health and bad health.
Mhm.
All I'm saying is that it's possible to know how to always make the right choice.
Mhm.
It's possible to know what's going on in your biology, what's broken, and what do you actually need to prioritize, and not choose things that you don't even need. All
Mhm.
that guy needed was exactly what we talked about. He needed DIM, resveratrol, ECG, EGCG to slow the CYP19A1 gene down because he was already making enough testosterone. He was just converting it all to estrogen. He just needed to stop that tap. That was it. He didn't need to add anything, right? And so we did that, and all of a sudden, this guy he went from being an athlete to being anxiety to being a super athlete because we gave him all this testosterone back and more, right? And that's literally all it took was 3 supplements.
Mhm. Yeah, so powerful. Um, that, yeah, wow. They shouldn't even be on bioidentical hormones.
Yeah. This was a wave in like 2019, 2020, right before COVID, where a whole bunch of NHL guys were given these androgel packs. It would just became a thing that everybody was doing it.
Wow.
Yeah, and then they all stopped.
But this is important because everyone thinks like more is better when it comes to like we've had guys that we found like overdosed on vitamin D because no one ever told them, first of all, just in general, like, because some people metabolize it really well. So if you know that, but it just sits in like the change room and they just pop like a whole dropper full in their mouth. And so one guy's like, oh yeah, I do like 2 dropperfuls of vitamin D. And I go, what? And he's like,
Yeah.
I got to go get this surgery though, because I have these huge osteophytes in both my hips. It's the biggest the guy's ever seen. And I go, what? And like, he wasn't working with me. Like, I was treating him manually when he told me this. This was even before I was like really diving into all of the functional medicine stuff. I've been treating people for like 13 years. And I said, you got to stop that immediately. Like, and obviously he had vitamin D toxicity and he had other signs of it. Like he was severely fatigued. And then you looked at his liver markers because I was like, show me your blood work. And they do the blood work for the team. And like his like GGT was through the roof, showing like toxicity. Like his red blood cells were off. Like he was in a toxic state of vitamin D, which, and I'm sure it would be interesting to do his genetics, and we should have then, but we just took him off of it for then because obviously he had overdosed, but he had to get huge surgery on his hips. And then again we had that same problem with someone that I met, and he's like, oh yeah, I've had so many surgeries and da da da. And he's like a redhead, pale
Mm.
skin. Usually their genetics are more that they need less vitamin D, right? Like people. So, anyways, he wasn't even taking close to as much as the other guy, but it was just for a very prolonged period of time, like
Yep.
$10,000, $10,000, 10,000 IU a day. And again, huge osteophytes in his hips already by the time that I had met him, but he was overloaded in vitamin D too. Um, Vitamin D as well, not vitamin D2, D2, D3. I'm sure we're both high, but so that's just, too much of a good thing can be a bad
Yep.
thing, especially for some people. Even we talked about curcumin. And again, that's another thing that are just like sitting in, everyone just, oh, I should take it and high dose is better. But if you don't really know your pathway, then it could be doing something to your hormones that maybe it shouldn't. And I guess that's what we try to even teach people with like introspection. Like when you're on something, don't start a bunch of stuff together. Like start one thing on its own and like start
Yeah.
to see how your body's feeling. Just don't assume it's a good thing. So people, that's what I've seen, are so like disconnected to what they're actually even feeling. So we're trying to like get them connected with that, and we do that with, we start everything low and slow and move up, no matter if we know their genetics, if we don't. um so and now that we're going to know them on more and more people, then it's going to be even more powerful.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. We see a lot of overdosing. We see a lot of I've been to 5 different functional medicine doctors, and here's my supplement drawer, and there's like 50 bottles in there.
Yeah.
It's not possible that that's all of what you need, right?
Mhm.
The, in fact, I'm probably it's 10% of what you're seeing there. So it's not only about what do I need, but what do I don't need that I'm wasting my time, effort, and money on? And that's the case for most people,
Mhm.
especially when there's complexity. Like I can't figure this out. I don't know why I feel like this. And so different advice from different people adds up to too much advice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very common thing we see. People are overloading, overdosing themselves with too many supplements, too
Yeah.
many treatments, which if they were just with precision going in and dealing with the one thing that actually needed support,
Mm-hmm.
there's not a lot to do.
Yeah.
But there's massive ROI in terms of the work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's powerful information for people to have and start thinking of and look into their own cabinet and, start to really just try and think of why they're on things or try to find some information of why. And like, we don't even do a lot of B vitamin and this and that when we're working more on detoxing the body, so they need less of those and those genes turn off. But when you put these two things together, I think it's even the most powerful thing that you can do for someone's health.
For sure.
Okay, any other stories before we let you go? I know you have a busy day.
Yeah, I can actually tell you just, we talked about a male hormone story. I can tell you about a female hormone story. Because this will be really eye-opening for the women. Because you mentioned BRCA earlier, BRCA, right? The
Yeah.
BRCA gene. And a lot of women are fearful of BRCA because it's like this gene causes cancer. I need to cut my breast off.
Yeah, that was a terrible trend. Yes,
Yeah. And it's also now I need to cut my fallopian tubes out so I don't get ovarian cancer. That's the next thing that's happening.
I know. It's
And
crazy.
so, what does BRCA actually do? It does not cause cancer. It's a tumor suppressor.
Hmm.
So, God forbid you got cancer, this is the tool that your body uses to fight it and fix it. It also repairs damaged DNA. Reverses oxidation. It's a repair tool.
Hmm.
So if you have cancer and you don't repair, you're less likely to survive.
Hmm.
And the cancer cells in your body, which we all have all the time, are more likely to flourish because the repair tool isn't there.
Hmm.
You then need to ask, why would I get cancer? Right? That's the number one thing, as opposed to how do I mask it?
Exactly.
So some women, like we said, have that fast CYP19A1 gene that make too much estrogen.
Hmm.
They also may make a byproduct of estrogen called 4-hydroxyestrogen or 16-hydroxyestrogen, which is toxic. They also may be missing a certain detox gene or have a slow comp protein, which is one of the genes that your body uses to get rid of this hydroxyestrogen. So if you have that profile, too much estrogen, toxic version, missing the right detox genes to clear it, you have this perfect storm. And then you get to menopause and there's no menstrual cycle anymore. So this toxic load that you're making on a monthly basis, you don't get rid of. And your body knows, big deal, like this stuff is inflammatory. What do I do? So it tries to protect your organs, it tries to protect your vasculature, your veins, and it goes and deposits this stuff in fat. And where does a woman have fat? It's like hips, triceps, breasts, right? And then so you have this monthly load of toxic deposit in breast tissue. There's a gene called GSTP1, which is a glutathione gene, which is protective of the breast tissue. Some women are also not doing well there.
Hmm.
So I was dealing with this breast cancer patient who had this exact profile.
Hmm.
Not every woman with this profile gets breast cancer.
Hmm.
So she was estrogen dominant, estrogen toxic, bad detox pathways, bad in the GSTP1, which is specifically protective of the breast tissue. So she's wired for this exposure.
Hmm.
But why did she get sick when other people with the exact same profile don't get sick?
Hmm.
Because she had just started BHRT, same story. She had just started hormones,
Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
she was taking estradiol, which directly your genes convert into 4-hydroxyestrogen, the stuff that she was making too much of.
Hmm.
So it was funny because when I looked at her profile and she told me she was 52 and that she started menopause 2 years ago, the first question I asked is, are you taking hormones? She said, yeah. I said, are you taking estradiol? She said, yeah. I said, there it is.
Hmm.
That's it, because you just overloaded this funnel with 4-hydroxyestrogen causing inflammation.
Hmm.
Then she said, well, if that were true, why did I get ovarian cancer? I said, when did you get ovarian cancer? She said, in my 30s. I said, were you taking the birth control pill?
Yeah.
And she thought, and she said, yeah, for about a decade.
Yeah.
Yeah, so same exact story. You overloaded estrogen into the estrogen funnel, causing more estrogen toxicity. And at that age, it expresses as ovarian because you're still cycling.
Hmm.
In menopause, it expresses as breast cancer.
Hmm.
And so now we know I can take a 5-year-old girl and her genes don't change. What she's born with is what she dies with. And I can tell you, here's what's going to happen if you have these habits. But by the way, if you have these habits, it's not possible for it to happen. And then it doesn't matter what version of BRCA you have.
So what would it have done to me taking the pill? Because they put me on that for cramps when I was 13, but
Yeah.
before I knew anything, and my parents didn't know anything, and there's just like,
Yeah.
and mine favors the testosterone pathway.
Yeah, so for you, it would actually would have created a level of balance. So this is why I'm the same. There's no such thing as this is bad or that is bad.
Yeah,
What's good for me,
yeah.
right? In your case, you're the opposite. You were overly androgenized, so it would have led to some level of balance. So, for example, young girls that are dealing with acne or hair loss issues or crazy cramping or ovarian cysts, anxiety, they can actually benefit from taking a pill. I don't like to tell anyone to take medication, but temporarily, in terms of relief, it's not going to overload the system. It's actually going to create balance. It's going to pull them from the other direction into the middle, right?
Mhm,
But even then, there's foods and supplements that can do the same thing,
mhm.
but sometimes a band-aid is helpful while you're fixing the root cause.
So you're saying foods and supplements. So like, even knowing what I know, I like lots of people stay away from yams and stuff for estrogen dominance, but those foods are better for me. Like fennel is something that I
Yes.
eat a lot of. I'm not like scared of soy, like because I know that those things have something beneficial for me, but for years you stay away from estrogen dominance, and I was always told it was probably estrogen dominant after like in between me learning like from when I first got sick, when we didn't learn any of this. We learned hormones very briefly in Cairo College. Everything I've learned has come after from my own experiences, right? And diving in and having mentors and diving into literature and try and just figuring stuff out and being curious. So, you know, it was like all these moments that you start to have all these aha moments of all the stuff that you went through previously. And when
Mhm.
I was on the pill, I actually felt really good, to be honest. Like I
Yep.
wasn't one of those people. I went off the pill and that's when all my cramps came back and everything like that. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. I should probably get you to reread my thing and give
Yeah,
you.
let's take a look at it again. It's been a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was literally like what 20, what would it be? 28.
Yeah, you were very early on while we were still in the research phase, which was like 2019, 2020, around there.
Yeah, I would love to do that again because
Yeah,
like
yeah, we should.
that would be amazing.
Maybe that's the next podcast. We're gonna expose you to the world.
Oh, well, I already talked about everything anyways. Like I'm just trying to help people, right? And it's like, what is there to be ashamed of? We all have our physiology, we all have our tendencies, and that's what this is true biohacking, right? Like
Yeah,
this is like,
sure.
yeah. Yeah. So that's amazing. Okay. So I know you have a busy day. So so we're going to be offering to you the program with you, but and you told them all a little bit about it, but just tell them where they can find you if they don't already follow your amazing page so that they can get all the information that you put out there.
Yeah, if you just want to continue learning, and I spend a lot of time talking about, what the threats are, like everything you've been hearing today, what actually makes people sick and what doesn't. It's all on Instagram, Kashkhan official, KashKhan official. Rumble coming soon. Maybe I'll do an episode with Stephanie there. And
Yeah.
so that's all coming. But it's all on Instagram, and that's where I go, preach in terms of what I think people need to know. And in terms of diving into some of the things you've been hearing, this is why we're launching this program, which we don't typically do. So if you go to my website, not the corporate website, you're going to see two things. There's this annual retainer that celebrities and pro athletes do, which is like I'm their guy working with them, and it's not cheap, only because I can only handle so many people. And then there's like a group program, which is also not cheap. And so we worked with you to create this 1 day masterclass, so it's accessible to more people.
Mm.
And it's like one time, understand how your body works to never make a mistake again.
Yeah. And
That's it.
that link is going to be with the email that we send out. Plus it's going to be on the show notes and everything like that. Sorry, I cut
So
you off.
just click the link and you'll sign up there. You'll get a DNA test. You'll get all the reports, but more importantly, you're going to get invited to this masterclass where we're going to dive deep, deep, deep into the data. And it's everything you've always needed to know, you'll now know. And
Mhm.
every other future consideration, you'll get it right every time.
Amazing. I'm very excited to re-go over mine with you
Yeah.
now. And I appreciate your time because I know you're very busy, but I also, like I said, have so much respect for you for multiple levels. But like the fact that you're, putting yourself out there for the people to learn from you and also teaching one-on-one to people is hard. I know that I've done it for years. So Yes, thank you so much again, and we're gonna do this again for sure at
Yeah,
some.
amazing. Let's do it again.
Awesome.